Right, I have sat down to start filming this video far too many times than I would like to admit, and because I feel like it's taken too long, I stopped it and started it again. So this is going to be the final take of an introduction and beginning to this video. Welcome to today's video. I hope you're all doing really well. I am going to be reviewing every single book that I read in 2023. Before we begin, please don't forget to subscribe, like, hit that notification bell down below so that you don't miss out on any of my uploads. And other than that, we're just going to get straight into it so I don't have to start this again. Got my glass of Pepsi Max, feel like I already need a sip, feel like we've been working hard. But let's get going. First thing I should mention is that I read 26 books in 2023, which I'm personally really happy about. I feel like that's a big increase in what I've read previous years, partly down to the fact that I've discovered audiobooks. Because I've discovered audiobooks, I don't have physical copies of everything that I've read here with me to show you guys, but also I was in the habit of when I finished a physical book, I was selling it straight away, and if it didn't sell, I was donating it or taking it to the book swap at work or swapping it with my friends. So I don't have physical copies of everything, but what I do have here I will show you and put photos up of the rest. But starting off strong, the first book that I read in 2023 was called Hiroshima by John Hersey. This is all about the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, and it talks about the stories and experiences of I think about 6 or 7 different people, but at the same time as separating the people, it also linked them all together and told you how their paths crossed, which for me kept me hooked because I knew that if I didn't read the next chapter I wouldn't be able to make that link, so I wanted to read the book really quickly. This for me had the perfect balance of people's experiences with a bit of history kind of thrown into it and a few facts thrown into it, so I felt like I learned a lot, but I also felt like I connected to the people a lot. And for me, the only reason I rated it 4 out of 5 and it lost a star is because I wish the book was longer so I could have delved into these people's experiences more, because I was genuinely fascinated by this book and was really enjoying learning lots about the topic. Second on the list was also another 4-star read for me. This was called 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northup, and for me this book was, I don't even have the words for it, emotional, a massive kind of learning curve. But this book talks about Solomon Northup's experience during that time, but also before being taken as a slave and afterwards as well. It was quite graphic. It was a sad book to read. There were times that I kind of paused it as I listened to it as an audiobook and had to have a cry, had to have a deep breath, but I think that kind of shows how important it was for me to read this book, to listen to this book and to expand my knowledge on it, because really it's something I should have read a lot sooner, because it's something that I didn't know much about, and it very much affects kind of our world today, and it impacts the experiences and the lives of people of colour today. It's shocking, to be honest. That's a good word to describe this book. It is shocking, but it is a very important read. I would 100% recommend anybody reading this book, as long as you're kind of the age where that is suitable to do so. Now I'm actually going to read my review of the next book directly from my Goodreads account, because I feel like my words here can sum it up a little bit better than my random words that come out of my mouth. I rated this book 4 stars though, and my review says, I have read lots of similar books and found a focus on therapy and the difficulties experienced within it, rather than the goriness of the crimes, refreshing. It allowed me to engage in deeper learning and reflections about effective therapeutic skills, empathy and the demand for earlier input from mental health services. I would recommend this book to anyone who has an interest in forensic psychology or psychiatry. So this book is focused on a different patient within a hospital in each chapter. For me, the only reason it lost a star is because I found some topics a little bit more interesting than others. Again, just down to personal preference, to be honest, not really a reflection of the book itself. The next book that I read was called Open Water by Caleb Nelson. This one, I remember rating this and feeling a little bit torn on it, but I gave it 3 stars. The reason that this is slightly lower is because I felt like the writing style was a little bit different to what I'm used to, but I also found it quite hard at points to visualise what was going on in the book. For me, that's a really important thing when I'm reading a book. I like to be able to picture things, and usually I'm quite good at that, but for this, for some reason I just struggled. I haven't really explained what the book is about, I do apologise. It's basically about a man and a woman who are black, and it explores their experiences, their lives, how they kind of mix in together and the difficulties that they face with that. Some of the themes discussed within it are blackness and masculinity. I found that quite interesting to learn about, to think about, to reflect on, almost as a person that, you know, is white. The next book that I read is one of those that I kind of just forgot about by the time the end of the year came round, which is why it's important for me to take breaks in between filming this and take a bit longer to process stuff. This was called Stories to Make You Smile. The first story I found really funny and it made me laugh out loud. Again, each chapter is a different story written by a different person. After that, the rest of the stories, some of them I couldn't really relate to that much, some of them I just didn't find funny. So some of them I did start skipping through and just kind of picked out the chapters that kind of made me laugh the most, if you like. So it's something that I would recommend for quite an easy, quick, light-hearted read, but isn't really something I felt like I took much from, especially because I started skipping the book towards the end. I was kind of just done with it. So I actually rated this book 2 stars, which I feel like is quite low for me and sounds a bit harsh, but clearly at the time that's what I was thinking, so I'm going to stick with that and trust in old me. The next book that I read is the first one I have a physical copy of to show you. I feel like this just adds so much more to the video. It's Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I rated this 4 out of 5 stars, and for me it was a little bit slow at the start, I will admit, but because I'd heard such good things I really wanted to stick with it. After the beginning I really got into it and I loved it. I loved that there was a mixture of murder mystery, romance, drama. It really kept me interested. It follows the story of Kaya, a young girl growing up in a family that was quite kind of what's the word, like separated from society. I'm thinking of an actual word that just won't come to my mind. And it just explores her experience of growing up in that family. Like I say, it kept me kind of wanting to read more. I remember being desperate just to carry on reading it and find out what happens next. But I also felt really inspired by the main character of Kaya, because despite the whole town being against this girl, she still kind of thrived in her individuality. She still maintained her interests. And I know there's a film about this now, which I should definitely sit down and watch, but sometimes if I read a book, I don't want to watch the film because I have visions of what Kaya looks like, what the marsh looks like where she lived, and what the town was like, and sometimes I like to kind of hold on to those inside my head rather than watching it on screen and then kind of having that as my vision instead. I don't know if anybody else is the same, but this book I really did rate. It was worth the hype, I can confirm. The next book that I read is honestly one of the most beautiful front covers I have ever seen on a book. This is called Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, I think you would pronounce that. This book was really good. I really enjoyed it, and I'm laughing because I almost didn't expect to at the time. Again, I rated this 4 stars. There's clearly a theme with my rating here. This is all about a cafe where when customers come and sit in the cafe, they can sit in a certain seat and they have a coffee which allows them to go back in time when they drink it if they sit in that certain seat, but they have to finish the coffee whilst they've gone back to the past before it gets cold, otherwise they get stuck there. So each chapter again is based on a different person that wants to travel back in time, and it goes through their kind of reasons for wanting that, kind of what they want to go back to. It goes through their experience in going back in time and then talks a little bit about what happens to them afterwards, and I really enjoyed it. I know that there's lots of other books now in this series. I'm just looking up at my bookshelf. I know I've got one of them, but I believe there's like 4 or 5. I'm definitely going to be reading the second one in the series, which I think is what I've got on my shelf, and if I like it I will just purchase the rest. But I would really recommend reading this if you've kind of seen that it's quite hyped up. Like, I did thoroughly enjoy this one. Again, it was worth the hype. The next book that I read was called On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I don't really know what to say about this book. To give you a summary of what it's about, and I am going to have to read this slightly off Goodreads. It's about a boy and his mum, and when he's grown up he writes a letter to his mother who cannot read, and this book is basically the letter that he wrote. The book itself kind of explores lots of topics on race, on class, on masculinity, and also starts talking about addiction, violence, trauma, compassion, tenderness. I'm just reading this off, it all kind of links together. The reason I'm reading it off is because I don't know why, but I just didn't understand the book. I listened to it as an audiobook, and there was parts of it that I think it was like the third part, like the last little bit, I was like, oh yeah, like this is great. It was either the third or the first. It was when he was talking about sexuality in the book, and I was like, oh yeah, I kind of know what you're on about now. But whether it was because I was listening to it as an audiobook and not really present whilst listening to it, or the writing style kind of didn't work well with me, or the explanations didn't work well with me, I don't know. But for whatever reason, I was just listening to it and I was thinking, I don't understand what's going on here, I just don't get it. I did rate this 2 stars, it wasn't for me. Next up though, we have Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. I was really excited to read this book because I'd seen a lot about it. It's based in Ireland and it follows the story of a main character called Bill. He's a family man, he's a merchant, and he goes around this little Irish town selling his goods. I think it's coal, I can't quite remember what, but he's selling something to people, or he's helping people out in some way. And one day when he's doing his work, he goes to the church, a convent, and he bumps into girls that are kept within the convent who he suspects are being abused, and he explores that a little bit, he looks into it. I was going to carry on, but I don't really want to ruin a story, but that's kind of a short summary of what the book is about. For me, like I say, it's a topic that I would be really interested in, but the book was just too short, to be honest. I kind of wanted to know a little bit more about the women's experiences within the church, what was going on inside of it, whereas it seemed like Bill himself and his job and his family were the main focus, whereas when I read the blurb, that's not really the impression of the book that I got. So for that reason, again, I only rated this book 2 stars. I then read Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, and again I'm going to read my Goodreads review because I feel like it just sums it up really well. I wrote, I'm surprised to say I really enjoyed this book. Sally Rooney managed to make fairly unlikable people quite likeable. It was interesting to read it from the perception of one main character, but I would also love to read the story from a different point of view. I found that I was still craving more after reaching the end, which is sometimes frustrating, but I think in this case it's a good sign. I will definitely be reading more of Sally Rooney books in the future, and I think that sums it up really well. It follows 2 main characters, their story of kind of love and being together, but also their stories separately. But for me, it felt like a really nice escape from the real world to be learning about those characters. And the time has just come up in red on this. I can't remember what I was just saying, but my SD card kind of ran out of storage, so I've just deleted loads of stuff because I've not been through it since, oh god knows when, it's been months, so that doesn't really surprise me. But moving on, my next book that I read was I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy, and this was my first 5-star read of 2023. This book was incredible. I didn't grow up watching Jeanette McCurdy, but it follows kind of her life from being an early child until now pretty much. And even though I didn't grow up watching her on the telly, I found this book really emotional, really impactful. I took a lot from it, and I actually wrote a massive list of all the things that I related to as I was reading this book, or all the things that kind of spoke to me, which I still have on my notes now. And I feel like because of that, I learned a lot from this book, not just about kind of the author and the way that these experiences can shape you, but about myself too. And I found the fact that she wrote from the perspective of a child who doesn't recognise how damaging a parental relationship is to them at the time. I found that really interesting as well, and something that I was able to make a lot of links to myself, and again add to my little list. I just love this book, and so that's the reason I rated it 5 stars. The next one that I read was called Everything is True by Rupa Faruqi, and this book is a medical book. It's a true book, it's non-fiction, and it's a junior doctor's experiences of the first 40 days of lockdown. And it was very raw, it was very powerful. It didn't kind of hold back on any of the topics, you know, it was quite raw. and I think in a few years time, if I sat down and read the book, it would be one that I really enjoyed. But for me, I read this book I started it in March, at the end of March. It was too close for me to kind of read a book about lockdown and COVID. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like that was that long ago in my head. And so when I was reading about COVID, I was just thinking, oh God. And so I rated the book 3 stars, which I think is probably fairly generous based on how I felt at the time. Next up is a really exciting read. If you know me, you'll know that Henry Marsh has produced some of the books that I love the most. This is And Finally by Henry Marsh. Henry Marsh is a neurosurgeon. I think I've already just said that this is the 3rd in the series, but I'm losing track of what I'm saying because I'm getting tired. This is the 3rd in the series. I've read the first 2. This book is split into 2 halves. The first half kind of looks at the human brain in quite a lot of detail. And the second half, I think, could almost be considered an examination of death and what that means to people and what that looks like, at the same time that he talked about his experience with prostate cancer, which I thought was, you know, it gave me a massive insight into things, because I often sit there and think about what it's going to be like for me when I eventually need kind of any sort of medical intervention as someone that works in the NHS. And he went through his own experience of that, of going from being, you know, a top neurosurgeon to being a patient. And I feel like that is really insightful to read about, and I found that fascinating to kind of like listen to, you know, what he had to say about it. I thought it was a really good book. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say about it is, whilst it's quite raw, whilst it's quite emotional, Henry Marsh also adds in humour to the book, and at times this made me laugh out loud even though we're discussing quite emotional and sensitive topics. So yeah, I can't recommend this book or his previous books highly enough. I really love any book written by Henry Marsh, and I'm sad that this is the last one in the series because I wish that there was more. Another physical copy that I've got, we're kind of on a roll here now, but I also read The Prison Doctor, Women Inside by Dr. Amanda Brown. It kind of is what it says on the cover. Dr. Amanda Brown is a doctor that works within the prison, and this one is a second in the series, and it's based purely on women and their life and their experiences inside of the prison. I found this book much more interesting than the first one. There was less focus on the author herself and more focus on the residents inside of the prison, their stories, their experiences. And I also found some of the themes that were mentioned within the book fascinating, interesting. It spoke about kind of homelessness and how crime can be a form of survival for a lot of women, which is why you see kind of what we, you know, what people might call like the revolving door, people that keep going round and round to prison again and again and again. I love this one, and again it was a 5-star read for me, so you can see that my books kind of really picked up kind of midway through the year, and I really started enjoying them a lot more. On similar lines, I read Undoctored by Adam Kay. Adam Kay is a doctor, and he speaks of his experiences of being a doctor, but he also speaks of his experiences after kind of retiring from being a doctor. And this book was just amazing. I learned a lot more about the author in this one because there was more of a focus on his retirement and how that looked, but I still found it interesting, which did surprise me a little bit but also didn't, because Adam Kay's writing style has a way of just capturing your attention. He makes it serious and he makes you learn a lot, but he also makes it quite funny. There's a very kind of dark sense of humour in here sometimes, but I do appreciate that when the moment's right. So I love this book, and I actually rated this 5 stars as well, so would highly recommend you guys reading this if you've already read the first and the second and you're not sure if you fancy the third. I still really enjoyed it. The next book that I read was called Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney, and this book was okay. I rated this 3 stars. I know that Alice Feeney is a massive crime fiction author, and so I wanted to just read one of her books to see if I could get into them. A little summary: it's about a married lady who falls into a coma because of somebody else's actions, and the whole book kind of, it doesn't tell you whose actions that is, it kind of leaves you guessing, which is quite exciting. But while she's in a coma, she can also hear everything that's kind of going on around her, so she can hear conversations from her husband, from her sister, from the doctors, and it does kind of keep you on edge a little bit and wanting more. I did only rate this 3 stars. I did get a little bit kind of fed up with it and felt like it was a bit repetitive at times. It's not to say that I wouldn't read another one of Alice Feeney's book again, because I probably would. I don't think 3 stars is a terrible rating, but for me, perhaps it wasn't the best book. I'm sure she's probably got ones out there that I would prefer. Quite quickly after that, I read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, and this is about 2 friends. One of them passes away in a quite unexpected turn of events, and the other one steals her manuscript for a book because they're both writers, and publishes it as her own. And it kind of explores that, obviously, but also the differences between her and her friend who has passed in terms of race, in terms of identity, in terms of background and culture and history, and it goes into that. I don't like to give too many spoilers, but I am going to read my reflection straight off Goodreads because I thought about this quite a lot when I was writing it. And I'd wrote, I found the author's evaluation of the publishing industry interesting. Despite not being involved in the industry myself, it allowed me to question whether the diverse books that I have read have been published as a result of the author's passion or due to them being confined to writing about a certain topic. I also found myself considering whether authors should have lived experience of topics I write about, or whether research in history is enough, particularly because I often read books about the Holocaust, as some of these are fictional. I understand that the main character was probably not meant to be likeable, however this was something that I just couldn't get along well with. It felt tiring and frustrating to be involved in her thoughts constantly, although perhaps my discomfort was caused by my own expectations of the book, the characters, or the fact that this differs from the usual books I would read, and because of that I rated this book 3 stars. The next book that I read was called Unnatural Causes by Dr. Richard Shepherd. It looks like this. I think the front cover is so sick. I love it. I just wish I had it in paperback because I much prefer paperbacks to hardbacks. But this book was amazing. I loved it. Dr. Richard Shepherd is a forensic pathologist, and so he conducts post-mortems on people that have passed away, and he basically talks you through the process of conducting post-mortems on different people, goes through how it's a little bit of detective work. He shares their stories, shares their experiences, what he's learnt about the people, but also what he's learnt about himself at the same time, how his job impacts him, how it impacts others. It was just really interesting. There was so much depth to this book. I really enjoyed reading it. This was a book that I rated 4 stars. Can't quite remember why it lost a star, if I'm being honest, because I didn't write a full review for it. But I know that I did really enjoy it and would like to read the second one. So again, would recommend this one to a friend. This next one, I actually didn't realise what it was about until I started reading it. This is Educated by Tara Westover. I thought this was about a girl that struggled to get into education, and it is a true story. It's a non-fiction book. It's the author's own experiences. Whilst it is about her struggling to get an education, it also speaks a lot about her family, her upbringing, based on the fact that her family were A, Mormon, but B, very extreme with their views and very isolated from society in many ways. I really related to kind of her feelings of helplessness when it comes to deciding whether to like keep relationships with people or just and like keep quiet just to maintain them, and like bite your tongue a little bit, or you know, speak your truth and be who you are and create boundaries. I really related to that a lot. And whilst the book was upsetting, whilst it was scary in places, I also found it really uplifting and really inspiring to kind of hear her experiences of putting those boundaries in place and moving away from everything that she's known and almost starting afresh and starting a new life. I really took a lot from this book, and I rated it 5 out of 5 stars. So again, would recommend that you pick it up and read it. Next book that I read, Oh my goodness, I have such fond memories of it. It was Days at the Morisaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagisawa. I read this at a point when life was really busy and I wanted an escape and I wanted to slow down. The story is about a girl who breaks up with her boyfriend and in a complete change of events and turnaround of life moves in with her uncle who lives in a bookshop, and she's reunited with this uncle who she hasn't seen in years, and she just falls in love with the bookshop, falls in love with her uncle, and it talks you through kind of how she's dealing with that whilst navigating her breakup and the challenges that come with being in a bookshop. It was really, like I say, the escape that I needed. I felt very calm whilst I was reading this. My only wish with this book is that it was longer, because again it was a short one, but I feel like it could have explored things in a bit more depth. It could have just carried on. It didn't really feel like the ending was an ending and I was left craving more, which, do you know what, it might be the point. It leaves room for a second book in the series, which I would absolutely read, but I just kind of finished it and was like, oh, like, is that the end? Like, I was expecting something else, not sure what, but I wanted something else. So that was my only wish, and I rated the book 4 out of 5 stars because of that, basically. I then read Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton, and I was really excited about this because I'd heard so much hype about it. It's basically about the author, Dolly, and growing up in your 20s, navigating friendships, jobs, relationships, relationship breakdowns, losses. And so as a girl in her 20s, I was naturally quite excited to read it, to take things from it, to laugh along with it. And whilst I did do all of that, I didn't really feel like I related to a lot of the things in the book. Just personally, I found that a lot of our experiences were quite different, and so for that reason I wasn't like massively like whoa or like blown away by the book, which I kind of expected to be. I know you shouldn't go into a book with expectations, but with this one I did, and so for that reason I rated it 3 out of 5 stars, which does seem a little bit harsh on reflection, doesn't it? But that's again how I felt at the time. I don't remember being massively blown away by it, but I don't remember hating it either, so I feel like a nice middle ground is a good rating. This book was the one that took me the longest to read all year. It actually took me, oh, I'm a little bit confused because Goodreads is in American, but I believe this took me about 3 months basically. This is called The Bread the Devil Ned by Lisa Allen Agostini, and because it took me so long, I feel like my rating of the book is a little bit unfair. Like, it is lower because I've kind of lost track of the story a little bit. And I will read you the blurb, or some of the blurb, just so you get an understanding of what the book is about. It's about the main character called Alethea, who is independent and manages a boutique in the port of Spain, but behind closed doors she's covering up bruises from her abusive partner and seeking solace in an affair with her boss. When she witnesses another woman being murdered by a jealous lover, the reality of her own future comes a little too close to home. I think if I read this a little bit quicker, I would have really enjoyed the book and I would have rated it higher, but for me, because it took a bit of time, like I say, I lost track of things and I rated this 3 stars out of 5. Ah, this next one, I love this book. I really like watching GPs behind closed doors. There is a doctor called Amir Khan. He is a GP, obviously, and he's wrote a book, and I bought the book because I just love him. He seems so friendly and approachable and kind, and I wanted to read all about him in a little bit more detail than what a snippet on a show tells you about. So this book explores everything to do with being a GP, the highs, the lows from his perspective, but also tells you a lot about the patients that he works with as well. I thought it was quite an honest book. He didn't really hold back on certain topics and values and beliefs that he's got, which I really appreciate. I also found it to be quite sad at times because he's speaking about the realities of working within the NHS, and as we know, there's a lot of struggles and hardships that kind of come with that for staff and for patients as well. So it was quite sad at times too, and did make me quite emotional, but overall I really enjoyed the book, and this one was quite close to the top for me. This was 4 out of 5 stars, and I would really recommend for you guys to read it if you wanted more of a light-hearted, less kind of statistical book. This is definitely the sort of one to go for. He was kind of like Adam Kay, but without kind of the dark sense of humour, which I appreciated, because like you say, you don't always fancy that dark sense of humour, so this was a really good book to read in that instance. Next up, I read Normal People by Sally Rooney, because based on reading Conversations with Friends, as I said, I wanted to read more of her books. And again, this one, I don't really have too much to say about it. I really enjoyed it. Again, it follows kind of two people, their experiences separately, their experiences together, them navigating life. For me, it was quite a light-hearted read. It felt like an escape from my own life, which I really appreciated, and that's kind of the reason why I've been getting into fiction books a little bit more. I really liked this book. I rated it 4 out of 5 stars, and I will be reading the third in the series, which really shocks me but really pleases me at the same time. Well done, Sally Rooney. You have converted a non-believer, to be honest. Definitely worth the hype. The penultimate book that I read, I also listened to as an audiobook, which is why this is in pristine condition, because it's been on my bookshelf, but I just decided to listen to it instead. This is The Prison Doctor, The Final Sentence by Dr. Amanda Brown. Again, another one that I've read 2 books out of the series on this year, because I just thoroughly enjoy them. This one though, the difference is this is the final book in the series, and rather than being focused on women, this was focused on people that she'd met and worked with within a foreign national prison and their experiences that are linked to that. So she speaks about the danger that they face, whether that's within the prison itself, whether it's once they've been kind of released from prison and deported back to their home country and the danger that they face there, whether that's a danger due to the health conditions that they're seeing hurt because of, you know, due to illness or death or things like that. This book was really, really interesting. I loved reading it, and I am so sad that it is the final one in the series, because I would love to read more. I loved this. I rated it 5 out of 5. We've got a lot of 5-star reads this year, but that one did not disappoint. And then the very last book that I read it on Christmas and Boxing Day, and I think the day after, basically 2 days-ish around some point around Christmas, because it was a Christmas-based book called A Highland Christmas by MC Beaton, or yeah, MC Beaton, I think you pronounce that. And it was a really light-hearted read. It was about a detective in a small town in the Scottish Highlands, and some Christmas lights were stolen, and he was trying to figure out who stole the Christmas lights and save Christmas, basically, and save his job. It was a really short book. It was a really light-hearted read. Any other time, I probably wouldn't have really enjoyed the book, because it was so just light and airy-fairy. I feel like there was no kind of depth to it or anything like that, but it was a perfect thing to read around Christmas time when you are just slumped and want to relax and don't want to focus too much on stuff but still want to cozy up with a book. So I rated it 3 stars out of 5, and I've since been told by my friend Jess that her granddad has read loads of books by this author, and there's lots of others in the series as well, so I might consider getting myself another one, kind of, well, not this time next year, because that'll be 2025, oh god, but around Christmas time I might consider buying another one, although I do have some other Christmas themed books on my shelf, so I should probably read those first. But big breath, that was all of the 26 books that I've read in 2023. I have no idea how long this video is going to be, and I'm going to apologise now because it's going to be bloody lengthy. But if you've watched it to the end, then I imagine that it was of some interest to you, so thank you for sticking around, and please do let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought. I'd love to talk about them, because I just don't have any book friends really, apart from the odd one that I can discuss these things with. And also let me know if you have any other similar books based on the ones that I've loved that you would recommend down below in the comments, because I'm always open to suggestions, and I'm always open to buying more books, because buying and reading are 2 different hobbies. But yeah, I'm going to bring this to a close. I don't want to waffle too much because I've waffled for ages. Thank you very much for watching. I do really hope you've enjoyed. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe down below. And other than that, I will see you very soon in the next video. Goodbye.